Welcome everyone, today I have a new guide for Diablo 4, and in this video, due to popular requests, we'll be going into a mini rogue build. And this build will have some really interesting aspects of the rogue, which including stun locking enemies with percentage of change of stun, and also a lot of attack speed and also a lot of disable. So our rogue will enjoy a lot of bonus attack speed, plus damage reduction, and also plus different ways to stun enemies and also to immobilize enemies. And we'll gain additional benefits by casting the Shadow Clone, which duplicates all of the controlling spells and also with bonus damage. So starting with the summary of the skill choices for this build. For basic skills, we can go with Blade Shift or go with Invigorating Strike. Now this really depends on whether we want the bonus stats with movement speed and also damage reduction with Blade Shift and also a bit of mobility, or we want more energy and resource. So we talk about this in the skill tree. As for core choices, we'll go with Flurry. Flurry will allow us to attack multiple times with a lot of benefits. Now for agility, we'll go with Shadow Step. Shadow Step allows us to engage enemies from behind, which is going to be very essential for momentum. We want to do backsteps. Shadow Step can also mobilize or immobilize enemy, which allows us to gain more momentum points and also to disable them. Sabotage will go with Shadow Shroud. Shadow Shroud is a defensive spell which provides us with damage reduction. It also provides us with increased damage and also additional damage if we go with certain codex. Now for the Imbuement, we'll go with Shadow Imbuement, because this spell can provide us with a lot of vulnerability, and this spell can also stun enemies with the very fast attack speed we have. As for the ultimate, we still go with Shadow Clone. Shadow Clone is by far the best ultimate I feel for the rogue, and there's a lot of utility. Because Shadow Clone will duplicate the spells you cast. This means the Shadow Clone can stun enemies, the Shadow Clone can debuff enemies, and the Shadow Clone can do a lot of your active spells. This including immobilizing enemies, stunning them, and buffing yourself as well. So coming over to a skill tree for the max level rogue at level 50 with 50 Reno. So here I went with Blade Shift. There's a lot of good things about Blade Shift. Now because Blade Shift allows us to move freely through enemies, this can be especially good when you're facing lots of enemies, want to reposition yourself. And by doing Blade Shift against enemies, you gain movement speed up to 20%. And on top of that, I think there's a really interesting part about this one is that Blade Shift, when Blade Shift is activated, you gain 15% non-physical resistance reduction, and also you gain the reduced control of the control impairment effects by 20%. So CC is at 20% less to you. So this particular passive actually gives us a bunch of defensive spells just because it's a passive. And the duration for the Blade Shift is about 3 seconds, I believe. So this is actually quite interesting, quite defensive for a melee rogue. Now, of course, if you're thinking about Invigorating Strike, I thought about that too. So this one will gain a lot of energy regeneration. And there will be more energy regeneration with Critical Strike or against injured or core control enemies. Again, will make enemies vulnerable as well when we have lower energy. So it is definitely an option to go with Blade Shift or go with Invigorating Strike depending on your playstyle. The next choice we have is going to be Flurry for the core skill. Now we'll be going with level 5 for Flurry, which will be the core skill of damage. And if we do pick the combo points for the specialization of the rogue, we also gain a bonus damage increase. So at level 3 with combo points, it's 133% with combo points and also plus 30 attack speed for 4.5 seconds. Now Flurry itself costs 25 energy, and this allows us to have multiple slashes. So the upgrade of Flurry means, when we're hitting vulnerable enemies, which will have abilities to debuff them, we also gain and heal up with maximum life, up to 12% per cast. And together with Flurry, if enemies are vulnerable, this will also spread onto other enemies. So this is actually not bad. We can also having the ability to evade and then stun enemies with Flurry. It is definitely a choice whether you want to spread the vulnerability for 20% damage increase on enemies, or if you want to stun enemies more with evading. Now, as for the passive for the core section, we can go with Shadow Steps, means that if we critical hit, we gain movement speed for 15% up to 4 seconds. Coming over to the agility section. So the Shadow Step is going to be a core spell that allows us to have some maneuverability and also mobility. So Shadow Step increases our movement speed for 2 seconds, and this moves behind enemies. While we're moving behind enemies, we also gain 8% critical chance against them, and also this can immobilize the enemy for 2 seconds. Now one of the reasons we want to immobilize enemy is going to be very clear when we come to the final part. Actually, let's go to this over here. So I'm going to skip a little, come to the Capstone. The Capstone will go with Momentum. Because we're going with Momentum, if we melee skill against enemy that is stunned, immobilized, or attacked from behind, we'll gain a stack of Momentum. And upon gaining 3 stacks of Momentum, we gain 20% damage reduction, 30% energy regeneration, and also 15% attack speed. So it's a really nice benefit to be having all the time if you can consistently stun, immobilize enemies, or hit from behind. And we can definitely do this once every 8 seconds. And this can become a consistent buff for the character. So every 8 seconds, you just need 1 stack. And once you get to 3 stacks, you just keep up 1 of your stacks. And this will keep you maintained with all those buffs. So coming back to agility, you can see that if we move behind enemies with faster movement speed and immobilize them, means we can stab them a few times and all of a sudden work with maxed momentum. So every time Shadow Step is on cooldown, you can use that for mobility, for the movement speed increase, or you can use that for the stacks of momentum. Now we can lower the Shadow Step cooldown by 3 seconds, but this is, I guess it's nice, but it's not as essential. It's better to guarantee we immobilize enemies and get all the stacks for the momentum. As for the passive over here, we'll go with Weapon Mastery. I think all the rogues build will go with Weapon Mastery. So here we want the sword damage increase to 9% and also the dagger damage increase to healthy enemies for 15%. Moving over to the Sabotage section, we can see that we'll be going with level 5 Dark Shroud. This is going to be one of the skills that is going to give us defense and also offense as a rogue that is melee. So Dark Shroud will give us 5 protective shadows, which have damage reduction per shadow. Now if you do get hit by enemies, this will reduce by 1. And because we'll be stunning and also hitting enemies and also evading their attacks and dodging them, ideally we don't want to spend all the Dark Shadows. And it's also passives that prevents the Dark Shadow from being spent. As long as we have at least 2 Dark Shadows, we also increase our critical chance by 10%. So everything else you gain a critical chance. So Dark Shadow, when you engage enemies with Dark Shadow, it's actually very defensive and also very offensive. Some of the passives to be noticed over here is going to be Explode. Explode will allow us to increase 18% damage to healthy and also injured enemies. This is definitely a must-have for most of the rogue build. And similarly, we'll go with Malice. Malice will also increase damage to vulnerable enemies by another 9%. Now, next part, we're going to have a look at how do we debuff enemies with vulnerable. So coming to Imbuments, we'll go with Shadow Imbuement for level 5. So the first rank of upgrade of Shadow Imbuement allows us to do a mini explosion. The second upgrade is where we can debuff enemies with vulnerability. So the primary explosion of Shadow Imbuement will make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. And this is kind of extended as we debuff enemies more with the Shadow Imbuement. One way to debuff enemies is, whenever time is 9-second cooldown, you can cast a spell. Another way to do this is going to be with the passives over here. So 1 point into potency and also 3 points into precision imbuement give us another 15% critical strike chance. Finally, Trick Attack gives us 15% chance of randomly imbuing our spells whenever they deal direct damage. So all the other spells that deal direct damage from the rogue, especially the core spell, can get a random imbuement even though the Shadow Imbuement is on cooldown. And this will come back to our stun locking potential. So the lucky hit for the shadow damage have a 10% chance to stun enemies. And if we do get any lucky hit multipliers, this can be higher. So this means we can consistently stun the enemies and immobilize them with multiple sources. One is with a Shadow Step, so every 9 seconds we can Shadow Step. And one is with every 9 seconds we can go with Shadow Imbuement. And with a 15% chance, even though those spells are on cooldown, you can still stun enemies and do additional damage. And finally, if we kill enemies under shadow damage, then we also gain 30 energy, which can be coming back to be casting more Flurry and giving us more damage. Looking at the ultimate section of the rogue. Now at the moment I really like Shadow Clone, because for the next 15 seconds your Shadow Clone will mimic your damage of your spells, and you become unstoppable. Not only that, the damage mimic is about 80%, so the Shadow Clone not only mimic your spells, they also cast similar spells to you. They can be cast the Shadow Shell, they can be casting Shadow Step which immobilize enemies, and they can be casting other spells. One of the spells they'll be casting will be the Shadow Imbuement, and that will also means that they can be stunning enemies for you, and when enemies are stunned, you'll be dealing a tremendous damage increase. Now we can also be going with 3 points into the Aftermath. That just means when you cast your Shadow Clone, you also restore 75 energy to be casting other spells, especially your core spell. And finally, we can go with Adrenaline Rush for the energy gain and perking into Haste. This means you either gain the 15% movement speed or 15% attack speed, depending on the amount of energy you have. So if you don't have energy, you attack faster for energy. If you have energy, you move faster to kill enemies. Now we did talk about momentum, and you can see that a central theme of this melee rogue build is that we'll be going with stunning enemies and immobilizing them and going to attacking them from behind. And this will give us a lot of offensive and also defensive aspects. Now moving over to the Codex of Power for the rogue. So for this one, we can still go with Obedience and also Might. Those are really nice just because they're defensive, and they're quite nice because rogue will be doing basic attacks as well. The one thing notice over here is going to be the aspect of Siphon Protection. Now because we have enemies who are vulnerable because of the Shadow Imbuement, if we hit enemies with core skill, there is a chance of getting a barrier. Because we're melee class and we're hitting enemies from close up, we want any barriers and also protections we can get. So this one's not bad. Now in terms of offense, there's so many choices for offense. So the normal ones is where we increase our resource casting spells, and also we can go with Aspect of Expectant, which increase the cost skill while we're doing melee skill. Now because we'll be stunning and also mobilizing enemies a lot, immobilizing them, so we can go with Aspect of Retribution for additional source of stunning them when they're at range, and also we deal 30% increased damage to stun enemies. Together with Aspect of Pummeling, we deal another 40% damage to enemies who are stunned. So this together is like 70% bonus net damage when you're constantly stunning enemies, especially when your Shadow also stuns enemies. We could also go with Rapid Aspect, which means we attack basic skills 23% faster, giving us more energy and also more defensive capacities. Now one of the core aspects we'll be looking for at the very early stage for the rogue, for the melee rogue, is going to be the Flurry damage to enemies in a circle around you and also deal 8% increased damage. So it's aspects of Encircling Blades. This one will be unlocked in the Fracture Peaks, and this is going to be one of the crucial build, aspects. You deal increased damage on your core spell. The core spell also have a circle radius to do AoE damage, which is very powerful, right? So this will be very important. Now we can also go with Vengeful Aspects. Because we have enemies who are vulnerable, that means we have a chance of increasing critical strike chance by another 9% when hitting vulnerable enemies. And finally, because we're using a Dark Shroud, and your clone will be casting Dark Shroud, so you can try to deal more shadow damage with the aspect of Volatile Shadows. And when the Shadow Shroud expires, you'll deal AoE damage. Now I'm not sure if the AoE damage we dealt here have a chance of stunning enemies, because here we says shadow damage have a chance of stunning enemies, so this gives you more resource to stun enemies. Coming over to the resource section for the aspects, we can have the Ravenous aspects. So killing vulnerable enemies give us more resource regeneration for the next 4 seconds. And because we're critical chance build, we'll be doing a lot of crits. We'll go with the Wind Striker aspects for the mobility, so another 8% movement speed. Ideally for this build, you'll be moving a lot faster. You'll be charging into enemies with your Blade Shift, which gives you a lot of sustain and also durability, and also movement. While you have enough energy, casting Flurry will mean you do AoE damage to the enemy, and this also heals you as you critical hit, and as you hit vulnerable enemies. Now because we'll be crowd controlling enemies a lot, we can go with the Shadow Imbuement quite early, or we can start with the Shadow Step to engage enemies with faster movement speed. Finally, if you're looking for a burst, and also if you're looking for massive amount of damage and also crowd control, you can cast your Shadow Clone. So it is definitely nice for the combination of melee rogue build, and I'm interested in trying this out if we get a chance. And as for the specialization of the rogue, I have thought about this. So we mentioned previously in our previous video about the specialization. If you go with combo points, having 1 to 3 combo points is actually really nice. You always gain an attack speed bonus and also a damage bonus. So you can see the combo points with the core skills. If you're going with unlimited energy, with a 4-second unlimited energy, having this for the Flurry is also not bad. Again, I recommend comparing both of them to see which one deals the most damage. And finally, once preparation becomes available for the final specialization, having more cooldowns and more casting for the Shadow Clone will be essentially nice. And with achievement saying that you can cast Shadow Clone 3 times in a row, that means every 20 seconds you could cast a Shadow Clone for a boost of damage. This also gives you energy, right? Which will be really nice. Now before you go, and if you guys didn't know, we have a new YouTube channel. So I just started a YouTube channel with my girlfriend yesterday, and you can see this is only 12 hours old, this YouTube channel. And if you guys haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe and check out the behind the scenes and also fun clips and also more stories about us. And then you get to know me a little more personally instead of just reading the news and also the games, right? So I want to share a little bit more with you guys. So make sure you check this channel out if you're interested about Matt and also Uni. She's really funny too, and she's really shy. So I want to give her a surprise and do a shout out for the new channel to get some subscribers. Thank you guys. I'll see you guys next time.